All right. Good morning, everybody. As Carly said, my name's Jake Damphouse. I'm a national account manager with 911 Inform. We partner with Intelix for many different things, but obviously the focus of today's discussion is around compliance and safety for your organization. A little background on 911 Inform. We're really an emergency management platform, and what I'm going to go through today is a couple of our different modules that really focus around compliance, especially with Carey's Law, Ray-Bombs Act, for your telephones and your telephony environment, as well as some other additional components that really look at the day-to-day safety and communication when emergencies take place within your environment. So with that, I'm going to go through probably 5-6 slides, not a lot, mainly just some background and some information kind of about what we're doing and how we get you to the point where you become compliant. And then I'm going to get into a product demo, really high level across the board. At the end of this, if you want to know some more information, want to get a real understanding of how this would fit in your environment specifically and, kind of get into the details, we're more than happy to schedule kind of a one-on-one discussion with you to kind of dive in, get specific, talk about some of the use cases that really come up on a day-to-day basis. So talking to those modules specifically, really the three main modules here are what we call our location discovery solution, our cellular notifications, and our connected building. Location discovery solution is really kind of an umbrella term for our 911 and Carey's Law, Ray-Bombs Act compliance. There's a lot of different customizations that can be made depending on the way that your environment works, whether you have different network settings, whether you have any specific work from home users, hybrid environments, and we're fairly agnostic across the board. So whether you have Avaya, Cisco, a cloud platform, we have solutions for all of those scenarios. I'm going to talk to location discovery solution a little bit more in depth here as we go. But really that's kind of, when we talk compliance, you can think location discovery solution as the product for that. Now, part of the location discovery solution, really what that's focused on is, your telephony environment, your communications, whether that's UCAS, CCAS. But outside of that, obviously, everybody has smartphones that sit in their pockets. And whether they're on site, whether they're working at home, those are probably going to be the majority of 911 calls. A study a couple of years ago was done that basically said 85% of all 911 calls are made from cell phones, right? So while the legislation and the compliance aspect of this is certainly kind of top of mind, it's really only looking at 15% of the 911 calls. And that number, honestly, is probably shrinking down by the day as cell phones are just more and more common. So with that, what our cellular notifications provide the capability to do is to notify your internal groups when you have a 911 call from a smartphone within one of your brick and mortar sites or one of your campuses. We geofence the property, basically determine this is your organization's boundary. And then on the back end, we basically set that up within the 911 network to say, if the call comes from one of your devices within this space, you have a designated team that's going to get that notification. So I'll dive a little bit more in depth to that in a moment as well. Now, the common theme between location discovery solution and the cellular notifications is that we're notifying a group internal to your organization that an emergency is happening. And where that kind of pushes everything is to this connected building, which is really the module that sits after an emergency has started. With connected building, we basically have the ability to integrate to existing door access control systems, security cameras, paging, digital signage, really a lot of the existing framework of what you have in place today from a security standpoint. Our goal is to integrate that into our platform so that you have kind of a seamless platform and a seamless place to go if you have an emergency event. Now, before I even dive into any of these specifically, the one thing I want to make very clear is we are very a la carte. You do not need to do all of the above in order to, work with the 911 Inform platform. You can very much pick and choose some of the individual aspects based on whatever your needs might be. So to kind of go, excuse me, kind of go from point A down here with location discovery solution. I want to take a step back and just review the legislation. At this point, I think a lot of people are very familiar, but for those that are not, Carey's Law and Ray Baum's Act are both FCC regulated pieces of legislation. They've been in effect for 3 or 4 years at this point fully. And really, at this point, because they're both in effect fully, you can look at them together and you can look at them really from a requirements standpoint. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're trying to divide Carey's Law and Ray Baum's Act. So Carey's Law came first. It's a little bit more simplified, and it requires direct access to 911, meaning you cannot have or only require a prefix for a 911 call. So 8911, 9911, right? That digit for an outside line. You can obviously set your system up to also include those dial codes as 911 calls, but you need to ensure that 911 alone makes a 911 call. Additionally, with Carey's Law, 911 calls do need to be delivered to the 911 network or to the PSAP. If you have an internal security team that is taking those calls and you're kind of routing that internally, that is deemed a violation of Carey's Law. So making sure that that 911 call is delivered out to the 911 network and routed properly to whatever 911 center services your local, you locally is an important piece. The final piece of Carey's Law is that an on-site notification is delivered at the time that 911 is dialed. Someone on site, someone within the organization needs to get a notification. Now, the backstory of why Carey's Law and why a lot of this legislation is in place is because of a woman named Carey Hunt. So back in 2013, in Marshall, Texas, Carey met with her estranged husband in a motel, and she brought her 9-year-old daughter, Brianna, along. Once she got into the motel room, the estranged husband grabbed her, pulled her into the bathroom, and started stabbing her repeatedly. While this was all going on, the 9-year-old daughter, Brianna, tried to call 911 4 times from the motel phone. That phone system required an outside line, or required an 8 to get to an outside line. And no one was notified at the front desk or within the organization that 911 was attempted to be dialed. Unfortunately, Carey did pass, but as the investigation kind of went on, the coroner deemed that she was alive for 30 minutes following the incident. Because the repeated attempts were really unknown, services weren't rendered for about 45, right? So if they had known, if someone in the building even had known that 911 was attempted to be dialed, it's very likely that Carey might be alive today. So following that, obviously a lot of the legislation around just access to 911 alone was pushed forward. So following Carey's Law, what kind of came about was Ray Baum's Act. And what Ray Baum's Act brings into the equation is on-site notification is carried over from Carey's Law, but it includes what's called the dispatchable location requirement. And this is really where the challenge comes in for a lot of organizations, because what the dispatchable location piece of Ray Baum's Act requires is that not only are we reporting the street address of the call, but also any additional detail about where that caller is. So if you're in a multi-floor building, at the minimum, you want to know what floor that's going to. In some organizations that we've worked with, they want to know the exact cubicle for where that call is coming from. So really what it's requiring is, let's take the guesswork out of the police, fire, EMS hands of where they need to respond. Let's know exactly where they need to go so that we're not searching for the emergency we know exactly where it is and save some time on that. So dispatchable location is definitely one of the challenges, but with some of the tools that are out there, it can be made easier within the organization. The final piece of Ray Baum's Act is also providing a valid callback number for the device that's made the call. Now, to clarify, the callback number that's reported to the 911 center does not need to be directly to the device that made the call. So if you have outward dialed phones only, especially in contact centers, we see that often. You do not need to necessarily have that call go back to the individual. You can set an organization or a building-wide callback number, and typically that can be a security desk or a front desk of somewhere where they're also getting a notification that 911 was dialed so that they're aware that there is an emergency. So moving into obviously we've laid out the requirements, some of the challenges, and to talk about what it is we're doing to help ease some of the pain that's caused or some of the challenges that the legislation brings up. So again, our solution for this is called 911 Informed Location Discovery Solution, or LDS for short. And really at the core of this, to simplify it, there's three main components that we're providing to meet the legislation and to meet the compliance requirements. The first is doing location discovery. So in a specific, an especially mobile world where you might have users that are working remotely, you might have users that are in and out of the office, they're hybrid, a couple days in the office a week, but they're taking a device, whether that's a soft client on a laptop, whether that's, they have multiple phones, one in their home office, one in the physical office. We need to do some discovery to understand where the devices actually live. Because the devices, talking, handsets, soft clients alone, they don't have the intelligence to know where they are. So our set of tools can basically enact some of the discovery processes, to understand where they are. We can utilize some network information and network forensics to identify that. We can assign users that own specific devices so that when they move, they're basically prompted to keep themselves up to date. So there's a lot of different configurations that we can apply, but the goal obviously is to stay as on top of the information as possible. Now, once we know where that information, once we know the information about where the devices actually live, the second piece is, well, when you have a 911 call, how do we get that information to the proper authorities, whether that's the 911 center or obviously internally to notify your teams of when there's a 911 call. So we have a lot of different ways and a lot of flexibility to keep any of the resiliency and the redundancy that your system might have, right? Failover trunks, anything like that. We keep all that in place so that you have services even in the event of certain outages, but we can still provide as much data to the 911 center as possible. And then obviously the third piece of the solution is delivering those notifications to your teams internally. And those notifications can be broken out if you have multiple campus locations or multiple buildings spread out, in multiple cities or states. You can break those notifications groups down on a building by building, state by state basis, so that individuals are only receiving notifications for locations that really matter to them. A couple notes, right? And again, to go more in depth about certain environments, more than happy to schedule additional calls and kind of deep dives. But a couple notes just to take away, the way we work and the way we kind of operate. Any work from home or mobile users, a user is a user to us. It does not require any additional cost. Because of some of the ways that we kind of operate and the way that we configure our back end, we can reduce the number of DIDs, right? Especially if you have a lot of extension-based only users. We don't need to require a DID alone for 911 purposes in a lot of cases. So a couple of those components from a configuration standpoint. And then really when we talk about the updates of information, in a traditional 911 or E911 sense, Location updates of those devices and these phone numbers could take a long time because you're basically updating a public database. We don't necessarily do that. We keep everything in-house until needed, until the 911 call takes place. So what that does for us is we update locations in real time. So if someone is really mobile, if they're in and out of the office a couple times a day or traveling, we update that information at the time that someone's moving. Because of the way we are updating and basically prompting users, we're getting precise and accurate information. We don't have to generalize in a lot of cases. We don't have to just say you're on a floor. We can get down to specific room or cubicle level detail of data. And that information is fast and oftentimes automated to the point where there isn't a necessity for end user interaction. So that's kind of the location discovery solution. Again, can certainly go more in depth as needed. Now what I want to do is kind of shift gears and go into the cellular notifications and talk about what that can provide for the enterprise. And really to do that best is to just show an example of how this would work and where this would go. So we'll take this campus as an example. What we would do, right, in the campus here is really some buildings. You obviously have some green space, a parking lot as well. We would work with your organization to define the boundary lines of, your property. Obviously includes all those green spaces and parking lots. And within that boundary line, we would essentially be monitoring for any devices that made a 911 call from a smartphone. Now, that information is utilizing what's called a device-based hybrid location out of the smartphone. It's the same location that you would get if you open up Uber or Google Maps and you see the blue dot on your screen of this is where your device thinks you are. When those calls take place from one of those defined boundary lines, we're able to then notify the designated team internally to say, this is where we think you are, or this is where the emergency call is coming from, excuse me. And you don't need to know who that caller is, right? So this is not specific to, a list of users that you've collected or phone numbers. This is purely location-based information. So it could be someone that's on your campus or on your property for the very first time. They slip, they fall, and they call 911. You're going to get that notification internally. So you don't need to know who they are. And they are native 911 calls. So you don't need to call for, a specific emergency number. You don't need to make that call from an app. This is just native 911. So we're not actually touching the call. We're not impeding on that. That 911 call happens as it normally would. Only difference being you're getting a heads up that there's an emergency taking place, likely before you would know today, before either the police reach out to you or a police car, fire truck, or an ambulance shows up on your property. Now, this is applicable for smartphone devices, Android 4.0 or newer, or iOS 12 or newer. Really, as long as the device operating system has been updated within the last 5 or 6 years, that will trigger the notification. So with that, what I'm going to do is jump into an actual demo of the platform, kind of walk through what a notification can look like, and some of the different tool sets that are available. First thing that would kind of pop up, what I want to show is an example of what a notification looks like. So in this case, you'll see probably some typical information just in text format. That it was a 911 call, the location where it was happening, and then the street address, room, floor, etc. Across all of the mediums, whether it's text message, email, screen pop on a laptop or a desktop, in the ways that we're notifying, what's going to be common is a link to an emergency notification. And I've opened up on a different screen here. Now, what that link brings you into is essentially a recreation of your environment as an emergency is taking place. So one of the main things that we do is we can digitize floor plans of the facilities, and these become interactive during an emergency. They're kind of the base layer to just identify a location of what's going on. So in this case, we have an emergency happening out of room D. And let's say, for example, I am an administrator or I'm someone on site, and I see this notification. I'm going to run down and figure out why 911 was called from room D. Over on the right side here, we have a comments box, which is really just a large group chat for everybody that's involved, with this emergency. So what I can do, once I figure out what's going on, we're going to use an example here of someone's having a medical event. I can let everybody know that it's a medical emergency, moving to the break room for med kit. So a couple things that we can do just based off of this message alone. Now, that comment, that's going to go out to everybody else that received the initial alert that we have an emergency, we have a 911 call. And then what I can do is actually reach over, I can click on the break room because that's where we're moving it. And I can update that in real time to say, hey, we have a 911 call coming from the break room. Or if you're responding, this is really where you need to go. Yeah, the call happened in room D, but we've since moved the emergency down the hall. Second component is we now know what the emergency is about, right? We know that it's a medical emergency. One of the things that our platform can do is build in emergency procedures and policies specific to, examples here. We have active shooter, lockdown, medical emergency. So obviously in this case, what we're going to do is escalate this to let everybody know that we have a medical emergency. Now, what this is going to do, at least for my organization, you can customize this however you'd like. This can build in and kind of take care of a couple steps that you might have to take manually today. So when I click when I just escalated that, I've actually pushed this notification out to an additional 6 people who I've designated that really are only needed for medical type events. Obviously, for things like lockdowns or active shooters, you might want to let everybody know within the organization, hey, we have a lockdown event at location X. If you're in the building, close the windows, close the blinds, close the doors, and get away. If you're outside of the building, please do not come in, right? We stay away from the area. So a lot of different things that can kind of be done just with one click of a button. And again, for medical emergency, we can start to show where emergency assets actually are physically located within the building. So in this case, we have an AED. We can show where that's actually located. As we talked earlier, connected building is one of those modules that we have to offer. And really where that comes into play is once you have an emergency. So as you see on the screen here, we have doors, cameras notated throughout the building. And really what that can give us the ability to do is centralize kind of our command and control of any of the assets that are within the building. So in this case, let's say I am outside the building. I can actually reach over just on that notification. I can click on door 2 and unlock that. Now, I have that ability as an administrator, but everything within the system is permissions based. So you may have some users that, you want them to know that there's an emergency going on, but you don't want them to have capabilities to lock the building down or lock or unlock doors, view cameras. So everything can be permissions based and user types can be customized as needed. So, I can reach over, I can unlock door number 2, or I can actually reach over and view a camera remotely. So this is our office in New Jersey. This is the front desk live right now. As an example, or I can look at our development center down the hall, figure out what's going on. So I can do this remotely. Myself, I'm up in the Boston area, but I can view this looking at, our office in New Jersey and just see what's going on. So even if I'm not on site, I can have kind of remote access. Obviously, there's a lot of different components and a lot of different integrations that we can talk to, but really just wanted to kind of highlight some of the aspects that we can provide. Kind of the final piece I wanted to touch on is from data security and information security. This information is really, and capability is really only available during the emergency response itself. The moment I had closed this out or any administrator closes this event down, all the access goes away. So I no longer have the ability to, view the cameras or lock the doors or, change emergency locations. So this really becomes kind of a centralized response point during the emergency, but outside of an emergency, a lot of the information about floor plans, etc., all that goes away. So again, very high level overview, but more than happy to schedule an in-depth discussion with any of you or your team members. Happy to cross departments as well. A lot of our organization or a lot of our discussions certainly talk to many different departments within organizations, right? Obviously IT and network, but we've definitely had discussions with obviously security teams, facilities, HR, administrators across the board, right? This touches everybody because of the effect of, it is an emergency scenario. So with that, Carly, I think we'll open it up for Q&A, just to touch on a couple additional things, and then we will give some time back for your day.
Thank you so much, Jake. Let me see. Our first question is, do you work with other phone vendors?
Yeah, absolutely. We try to be as agnostic as possible. Obviously, Avaya is a key partner for us, but we are platform agnostic.
Thank you. Another one. Do I have to connect all of my cameras or only certain ones?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it is like everything else. It's very a la carte. So you do not need to connect every camera. Honestly, a lot of our customers kind of look at the high traffic areas within the building, front door, main hallways, that sort of a thing. And those kind of become kind of your key viewpoints. So long story short, no, you do not need to connect every camera. You can certainly pick and choose. And the same goes for doors that get integrated as well. Typically, we're looking at kind of the main exterior doors when we integrate those.
Wonderful. Last question. With geofencing, who can I alert for calls that happen within my geofence?
So with the geofence, basically you can predetermine a group within the organization, within that site regionally, and they would get those notifications, whether it's a geofence 911 call, whether it's a 911 call from your phone system that would be integrated. You can really kind of break down the groups per site, per building, or per region that would get those notifications.
Wonderful. Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have. We can certainly reach out to everyone to follow up in the next few days as well.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks again. And thanks Intelix for the time and the opportunity.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.